they go into individual markets and they work with companies like Metatech to actually build these smartphones for a specific operator and sell them, and they're subsidized by the operator to sell them off really, really cheap.
Yeah.
So we're talking like $20 for a smart feature phone. And this is, one of the big challenges for Africa is device affordability. And it's one of the only ways you're going to combat it.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're back in the studio this week, but it is still the usual suspects of me, Jamie and Ian from Light Reading. We are going to be talking about, I think last week there was quite a fun story about Labour says that if they win the election, they're going to nationalise most of BT. Mm-hmm. And everyone was like, what? So that's definitely worth chatting about. And then one of the reasons we haven't recorded a podcast for about 8 or 9 days is because Jamie was over in Africa, in South Africa to be precise, at AfricaCom. And you were over in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
When you weren't sparking up, you were at the tip. You were at the tip summit.
No, I left that to other people who were there, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. I thought everyone did when they were in Amsterdam. I did last time I was there, and it all went horribly wrong. But there we go.
It's not a good idea these days.
Yes, so we're going to talk about those 3 things. And just a reminder that if you're watching it on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, or countless other podcasting platforms. And then one other thing before we get on with it is to allow a slot for our sponsors. So here we go.
Mobile service providers will need a different approach to successfully roll out 5G new radio capabilities. Check out Amdocs Software automated and analytics-driven solutions at amdocs.com/5G-fast to learn more.
Right. Thank you once more, sponsors. And anyone else who's interested in sponsoring, obviously, you know where to come. Right, okay, so cracking on with it. So we've got a general election in about a month, haven't we?
Yeah.
And it was already a sort don't worry, before you start rolling your eyes and give me looks, I'm not going to go too off on a politics tangent. But it was already a huge general election because it's basically, to a large extent, a second referendum on Brexit as well.
Yeah.
If you vote Tories, you're going to get whatever version of Brexit Boris Johnson thinks he can do. If you vote anyone else, you're probably not going to get Brexit.
What do you get if you vote for the Brexiteer party now?
Brexit party. Well, if you vote for the Brexit party, you probably don't get Brexit because you're probably taking votes away from the Tories.
Right.
Yeah, they don't know what they're doing.
They hated the Conservatives deal at first, but now they like it.
I think someone had a word with Farage and went, look.
Okay, we said we wouldn't do attention. Come on.
Oh, yeah, it's nothing to do with telecom.
Well, he's asked me now. Can't get all authoritarian on me. We'll start talking French politics if you're not careful. Yeah, and I think someone had a word and basically went, if you compete with the Tories, you're actually going to make Brexit less possible. So I think that's where that went. Anyway, don't want to get in trouble with Pierre, so we better get back onto telecoms. So yes, we've got this election, already a big deal, but now we've got the parties obviously vying for public affection, and they're doing the usual thing, or they seem to be doing it more than ever, of basically chucking public largesse at the population to say, vote for us and you'll get free this, free that, free the other.
Yeah. And
of course, Labour being the more statist party that traditionally does sort of talk about increasing taxes and increasing public services, they can't be outdone by the Tories. So they've gone, all right, I'll see your increased spending on the NHS and I'll raise it a nationalised broadband.
Yeah.
And so they went, what we're going to do...
They want to nationalise everything, don't they, really? So
and they're quite a big fan of nationalising. And as I said in the piece I wrote about it, that there is, I'm not absolutely doctrinally opposed to it. When there is a natural monopoly of infrastructure, for example, rail, it's hard to imagine. I don't think there's much evidence in the privatised rail system that it's worked out particularly well for the average punter. So it's hard to imagine when you've got a natural monopoly and it's very hard to create competition within it. I think there's some main train services where you do have more than one supplier like Virgin and someone else. But on the whole,
there's still only one line, though, isn't there?
There's still only one line.
It's a single line which is controlled by Network Rail, which is a public company, and then they're franchised out over 10, 15-year licenses.
Right, but the point is, if you're, if I wanted to go to Wales, when you go out to Wales, do you have much choice between suppliers of the train?
Great Western Rail.
Yeah, that's it. So it's a monopoly, which means, obviously there's some degree of regulation, but any monopoly, whether it's a private or a public one, tends to mean less choice, less competition, less value for the consumer. Obviously means less choice. And so there's some argument for making that public. But I don't think that applies to broadband, because although there's a dominant supplier of, the equivalent of the tracks, i.e. the hardware, the fibre, the copper, which is OpenReach, BT, there are other ones. And also because of the way OpenReach has been regulated, there's a hell of a lot of MVNOs or whatever. What do we call MVNOs on fixed line?
ISPs.
I should know this.
ISPs,
just ISPs.
yeah, like Sky and that lot.
Yeah, just ISPs. I did know that. I'm not that crap at my job. So I think you do have competition. So I don't think we have a natural monopoly there. So I don't think that argument applies.
I think it's a different situation as well. Is that when you apply it to Network Rail, the infrastructure is already existing. There's no more build out to do. Whereas when you apply it to broadband services, you don't have fibre to every home, so there's still a lot of network rollout to complete. Therefore,
which is a big part of the Labour pitch. They're saying hardly any people have got fibre.
That's how they've sort of positioned it almost, isn't it? It's not. I mean, I think they just want to nationalise things anyway, but they've sort of presented this as the answer to Britain's problem of not having enough fibre everywhere. They've sort of picked up on this. We've only got 8 to 10% of homes that are fully fibre served, and look at South Korea; they've got 90-odd%, which gets back to this argument about whether we really need to have all fibre connections anyway. It's become a bit of an obsession.
The argument fundamentally contradicts itself when you turn around and you say, well, okay, you need fibre everywhere, and I genuinely believe you do need fibre everywhere, and not for now, not for 5 years' time, but in for 10, 15 years' time, when the services have been enabled and created that you need gigabit speed, which at the moment you don't. But that doesn't mean we should stop laying the groundwork for fibre. But to generate fibre, you need competition, you need external private investment. Now, if you nationalise any form of infrastructure, the government has already turned around and said we're not paying market value. Legally, we're allowed to pay the value that we determine would be beneficial for the taxpayer. Now, first of all,
well, that could be anything.
That could be anything,
and the market value would be pretty low anyway by the time they get in, and they've already announced this. So.
Yeah, but I mean, who's going to drive? Which external investor is going to pump cash into a company when they know or believe that a government is going to cripple the market cap and actual investment through undervaluing the overall organisation?
I think it's trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist as well. It's like, yes, all right, we do have low fibre penetration for all sorts of historic reasons compared with some countries like Spain and Portugal, and certainly ones in the Far East. But as Jamie was saying, the market's pretty competitive now. You've got organisations like City Fibre coming in, which is backed by Goldman Sachs, pumping cash in. You've got other infrastructure providers.
So quickly.
Yeah, OpenReach itself is committed to this, 4 million homes by March 2021, and then talking about if the regulatory environment is correct, 15 million by the mid-2020s. So there's the Conservatives' plan is basically to try and accelerate this. They're sort of aiming for this
Virgin Media.
Then you've got Virgin Media as well. So there's already that issue. They're trying to fix a problem that isn't there, and all they're going to do is come in with this nationalisation scheme, which, judging by the way public sector projects usually go, is going to be an absolute disaster.
I mean, there's a reason that that nationalised companies were privatised in the first place, and it was because these were companies that were fundamentally failing. When you look at the sort of energy sector, they were privatised to drive investment to improve infrastructure.
Yeah, one of the reasons. I mean, I think there's an element of short-term cash grab by the government that does it.
But arguably, it's worked out all right. I mean, it's worked out well. And why undermine the other? This is another massive thing that really drives me up the wall about this nationalisation argument, is that who are the investors in these massive infrastructure companies? Now, infrastructure investors are generally really long-term investors in projects. So you're looking at
pension funds,
public investment funds. If you buy a company for a quarter of its worth, you absolutely shatter the investments that have been put into it.
Quite.
And if you've got a load of pension funds, you're screwing Joe Bloggs, the general public, in the long run, because the pension funds get screwed out of this. So it's a completely short-sighted argument.
And this is a problem you get with some aspects of doctrinal leftism, which is intrinsically suspicious and hostile of any private ownership. Property is theft and all that kind of stuff. They like to sort of negate the fact, for example, very high levels of taxation are considered to be sort of worthy and morally correct. But, if you're going to get deeply into the argument, you could argue we work hard. People listening to this podcast may argue the contrary. But we work, we earn some money, we already pay about half of it in tax. Most of the rest of it I spend on my family, not on myself. I don't see the great moral argument for the state to take most of that back when I've worked for it.
Do you think there are any positives in what they've said at all? Or
I think...
free broadband for life.
Well, yes, and obviously free needs to be put in parentheses.
Yeah.
I think there's very little of merit. It's impossible to imagine that they'd even be able to pull it off. Even if they grabbed OpenReach... this is the other thing that happens when you get these kind of sort of leftists in power, is the economic realities catch up with them. So they've made all these promises, and they say things should be more equal, things should be more evenly distributed, all that sort of stuff, which on the surface is hard to argue with. Of course, things should be fairer in inverted commas. But when they try and implement it, and they realise it costs money that they don't have, and then their credit rating goes down the toilet so they can't even borrow, which would almost certainly happen. I think I'm not sure if we're AAA, but we go right down.
Yeah.
So all sorts of economic realities. Basically, you don't live in a vacuum, and wealth has to come from somewhere. Money has to come from somewhere. And we've seen what happens in places like Venezuela and Zimbabwe and something like that. If you start messing around with the macroeconomic stuff, everything else goes Pete Tong. So no, I mean, I think the only positive that might come of it is just the conversations it's initiated, such as this, to make people even talk about it. And, maybe that's their aim. Maybe they're smarter than we give them credit for. And they just threw it out there to get people talking about nationalisation in general. But I think most of the conversations, certainly in the media, I haven't seen anything, not even in The Guardian, that particularly supported it.
Well, I noticed that because when they come out with something like that, you'd sort of expect BT's share price to take a bit of a hit, and it didn't really. And I just wondered if no one really...
I think it's probably recovered.
A couple of percent might have recovered from that, and it's still quite a bit higher than it was a few months ago. It went up a few weeks ago, I think, when Jamie and I were reporting on some of the convergence moves that they've made. So it still looks quite good compared to where it was earlier this year. But I don't know, people just don't think there's any chance that Corbyn will get in. I mean, they're quite a long way behind in the polls at the moment, aren't they? I think
they are. I mean, and I think announcements like that, I talk to lots of people, and I got lots of lefty mates, and announcements like that, even some of the more doctrinal lefty mates I've got, when they talk about nationalising entire industries, they're like, "Nah, you've lost the plot now, mate." So I think there's that. Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine. If they did get into power and start doing stuff like that, I think it would be catastrophic, and I don't think anyone thinks otherwise.
A bit like the late 1970s again.
Well, that's people like my dad who still have raw memories of it sort of refer to that. So yeah, hopefully it won't happen, but I presume Boris Johnson's going to do everything he can to arse this up. So we'll see. Yes. So, but yes, I mean, I think that's interesting. One other thing that came up, and the broader topic of nationalising. So they're saying that broadband's basically in sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs now. It's something that we absolutely need. It's no longer a luxury.
Yeah.
But then, and so we need it to be free in inverted commas. And obviously the inverted commas are it's not free because each of us is paying for it just through a massive capital investment of buying it off BT.
You should call it mandatory broadband.
Yeah, well, it basically is. I mean, that's the other thing, by the way. Sorry, a little tangent. When you set the precedent that the state can come in and start forcing companies to sell bits of themselves, the disincentive to do business at all in this country is massive. And then they talk about the maintenance of it. Oh, they're just going to tax Apple and Google. Apple and Google are going, yeah, right.
Jamie, have you spoken to anyone at City Fibre about it at all?
No.
You were away, weren't you? So,
Yeah.
I couldn't get in touch with them on Friday, but there's this interesting thing as well about other infrastructure investors are expected to provide access to this retail bit of the new kind of British broadband, as they're going to call it, that will sell services. And if they don't, then they can come in and nationalise them as well, basically, is the implication.
I did reach out to City Fibre. They weren't saying anything on the record at the time. I also got the impression in my asking around when I was writing it that a bunch of all these lot were basically getting together and having a chat on the day going,
right.
What the
Yeah. Let's not say
I think
anything
it was
to the
officially
media.
called the What the meeting.
Yeah. Well, I got some stuff out of OpenReach, but I didn't get anything out of City Fibre.
OpenReach just put me onto BT.
Yeah.
And again, I got the public statement from BT, but that
was very waffly. And
it was very, very generic.
Yeah.
But basically, if you look at the concluding paragraphs of my piece, I know that they correspond pretty much with BT's perspective on it.
Well, I think it's like you say, it's taken them all aback because BT's last earnings call, I remember Jansen being on that saying, they're encouraging the Labour government to sort of look at fibre in the same way that they expect the Conservatives to look at it, and they're sort of sounding quite optimistic about. I think they had assurances earlier in the year that even though rail and water and things like that are up for nationalisation, telecom would be left alone. So,
well, I think when I was looking at the BBC wrote it up, and they said that McDonnell had explicitly said just in July that they weren't looking to nationalise. So that's then you get into trust, and and people's worst fears about sort of socialists playing nice until they get voted in and then suddenly unveiling the full sort of socialist agenda worries people. So, well, that was interesting. All right, Africa. So, Jamie, you were just there. You were there a day longer than you intended to be.
Yeah.
What happened there? They cancelled your flight?
They cancelled my flights.
Did they give you some money?
Not yet.
Ooh.
Not yet. They cancelled my flight. One of the pilots is ill. Genuinely, that was the reason.
So you want it to be cancelled then, really?
Yeah.
Did you have the fish or the chicken?
But then all the flights immediately after it were fully booked, so I got delayed by a full 28 hours or something like that, which was didn't particularly enjoy that.
And as a result, you've got this healthy colour.
Yeah, I got a bit of sunburn. I climbed Lion's Head, which was incredibly dangerous.
That's the easy one.
Really, it's not the easy
Table
one.
Mountain is much harder.
I can show you. I can show you pictures.
Table Mountain is way steeper, way harder, way taller.
I guarantee you, it's not.
I
had to climb. I had to scale a rock face at one point.
Me too. Holding a cable.
Was terrifying.
Yeah.
Trying to compete.
But so I got out there for an extra 24 hours. But the entire week I was out there for AfricaCom, and it was a good show. Largely redundant reporting because it was pretty much exactly the same thing has been said before.
We need to do better at infrastructure.
We need to get infrastructure out there. Only a third of the continent is connected to the internet. Blah blah blah. Regulators are bad. Government is corrupt. All that sort of thing. But it's largely the same story that's been said for the last 4 years.
Time.
Yeah, it will be. It will be.
I don't know. By that stage, Huawei will have just
taken over.
Will have just
built out everything,
connected the whole continent.
It's just with a different twist on it every year. 3 years ago, it was about the government has poor regulation, so we can't get investment in. Last year, it was they're placing too much import tax on handsets, so we can't actually get affordable devices into people's hands. And then this year, it's been we don't have enough spectrum. So we can't actually deliver proper services.
Right.
And the spectrum thing, I did have a look, and they do have a valid point, especially in South Africa. But the one thing which I found very interesting is I got to spend a bit of time looking at KaiOS, which is which is a new operating system which is designed specifically for smart feature phones.
Right. So stripped down.
Yeah. Like what you'd expect a feature phone from a couple of years ago, but with 4G connectivity and the sort of like the light apps that you have on there, and it's an utterly, I think, an incredibly fascinating business to keep an eye on. and I don't think anyone's paying enough attention to it whatsoever. They go into individual markets and they work with companies like Metatech to actually build these smartphones for a specific operator and sell them, and they're subsidised by the operator to sell them off really, really cheap.
Yeah.
So we're talking like $20 for a smart feature phone. And this is, one of the big challenges for Africa is device affordability, and it's one of the only ways you're going to combat it.
And what are they like, the handsets themselves? I'm struggling to sort of think, because everybody says that feature phones.
Do they still have like a hard, old school?
You have a touch screen, or no? It's keyboard still.
Yeah. So you'll have a keypad. It'd be like mobile phones were, let's say, 10 years ago. Most people had those Nokia sort of candy bar type of ones, except that you will have a degree of smartphone functionality, like you'll be able to get Facebook or something like that. Yeah. Some stripped down version.
Yeah. It's not perfect scenario, but there's no other alternative.
Yeah.
You look at the price of smartphones. Even like a cheap 2-3-year-old smartphone is $200 to $300. Let's say if you strip out all the profit and marketing costs in there. So the average monthly salary in some parts of Africa is, $200 to $250, and you cannot,
or less,
down to $100 in certain places. You cannot sell smartphones in these markets, and therefore you cannot bring people onto the internet. You cannot increase telco revenues, and you cannot close the digital divide. So these feature phones are absolutely critical. And the interesting thing about Kai is that I've seen a load of people that are talking about it being a competitive threat to Google and Android, and it is. And those people just have not looked at Kai properly and do not understand what Kai is as a business.
Yeah,
it's designed to work as a complement to Android, not a competitive threat.
It's designed to operate at a level that Android can't really operate, isn't it?
Yeah, but a load of people think that they got Android One or something, which is their slimmed down version for feature phones. It's not. They're going to kill Android One eventually, because
who owns Kai? Sorry to butt in.
It's a private company.
Right.
Primary investor is Google.
Right.
Google was their first investor.
Does Orange invest in it?
Yes.
It does, yeah.
There's a few other companies, and HCL Technologies, which I think is, I can't remember why, but they're a big investor in someone else.
So Orange took an investment earlier this year when they had that event in London.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
They like a bit of Africa, Orange, don't they?
Well, it's one of their biggest markets.
Got a lot there, yeah.
But yeah, so and ultimately, Google services run on top of KaiOS. KaiOS has a completely different monetization model from Android, and Google services will continue to run. So the more smartphones or feature hybrid phones that KaiOS is on, the more money Google makes.
Google doesn't make any money from Android per se.
Well, yeah,
it just makes money out of being able to control an ecosystem where it can bring its services to the forefront.
Well, the way they make money is, their Chrome, Maps, Gmail, all that is a default function on the phone, and that will continue to be the case for Kai.
Quite. So they're fine, especially as they're an investor in it, so they can make sure they don't get funny ideas.
Kai, the way Kai make money is is a split in revenue, revenue sharing with the telcos. They take a fraction of every, gigabyte sold or
because the licensing model doesn't work in mobile.
That sounds quite lucrative for them.
Yeah, it could be very, very lucrative.
Because if you're just starting off from zero, then
and in-app purchases, so they have their own app store.
Yeah.
But I think it's a business that people should start paying a lot of attention to. They've got an install base of something like just short of 100 million at the moment. And the big thing is that they launched this, I think it was called the Smart Kitachi device in Tanzania, and they sold out of this device, which is a $20 feature phone, within 6 days. And they had the CEO of Vodacom services or sort of like partner services at this press conference I was at, and they were saying we can't sell it fast enough.
Right.
And we can't get shipments in fast enough.
Yeah.
They said we sold out. We're waiting for a new shipment of this phone, which lands on Monday, and as soon as that comes, we'll start selling again.
So when did the first ones appear in the market? How?
In terms of KaiOS devices?
Yeah, KaiOS devices.
A long time ago.
Right.
A long time ago.
But it's now starting to ramp up.
I remember it
quite
from
quickly.
previous AfricaComs it coming up.
The Geo phone,
Right, yeah.
that runs on KaiOS.
So it's in India as well.
It's in India.
An emerging market sort of thing generally.
Yeah. They've sold 23 million of those Geo phones. KaiOS is now the second largest OS system in India, having overtaken the iOS.
Is that the one that won Best Device at the Global Telecoms Awards? I think it
Dunno.
was. Yeah.
And the new devices are made to work on like getting onto the broader network stuff, 4G networks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Okay.
Yeah, that is the genuinely interesting thing that came out of AfricaCom for me this year, is that this KaiOS becoming a real business. And as soon as Vodafone is in 32 markets across Africa, so as soon as they can start aggressively pushing out devices onto their new markets, momentum is just going to gather, and this install base, I reckon it's going to hit 1 billion before we even know it.
Yeah.
There's two other sort of broader narratives I find really interesting about telecoms in the African market. One is obviously the more social one, that's just how incredibly empowering a smartphone is.
Yeah.
And that story is so much more, to me, so much more sort of graphic and emotive when you've got people who've got very little. The difference it can make to that. So the difference it make to our lives, if we didn't have our smartphones, then we wouldn't be able to talk shit to our mates on WhatsApp or something like that. But, the difference for someone who's got virtually no access to any infrastructure or services whatsoever, suddenly being able to get onto the mobile internet is huge.
This is where I think there's a lot of a lot of credibility in when people are saying that internet access should be a human right, because when you look at
like Corbyn,
like it makes no difference to us in the UK, because we can go to school, because we can go to the hospital, because we can go to the bank if we want to. It's not like it's on our doorstep a lot. Sometimes if you're living in the closed communities or the rural communities, but it is within a 20-minute drive. That isn't the case in Africa. The size of some of these countries is mind-blowing, and you're having to travel 5, 6, 7 hours to get to a doctor, to get to a school,
and
to get
a lot of them. It's not like they got great motorways and that sort of thing as well.
So you do see like the internet can be incredibly empowering for education, for healthcare.
Yeah.
Totally.
Banking, mobile money,
mobile money. It's mind blowing the impact it can have, and that's where I think there is credibility to this idea that connectivity should be a human right.
And are the operators talking about? Were all of them sort of talking about KaiOS a lot, or
Vodacom certainly is. Right. MTN, I'm not too sure, because I think they have their own in-house sort of like operating system. But I think just purely because of the scale and what KaiOS can offer in terms of its partnerships with like HCL, Google, with Orange, and with like Meta Tech, and there's another one that begins with A that I can't remember, but it's basically like a developer ecosystem.
Okay.
Eventually it'll get swallowed up. Because if they're dominating the Indian market, it's only going to be too long before they get scale there.
Yeah.
23 million is nothing in India.
No.
Yeah.
But it will be scale before too long, especially if Android starts culling their own services on Android One and start going, we're going to rely on Kai's reach instead of our own.
So it's at 23 million at the moment in India.
That's how many devices they've sold.
Right.
But Kai might be on other devices.
Yeah.
So that's just a Geo phone.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting, actually, and this applies to the Indian market to a large extent as well, is how stakeholders in the telecoms industry are trying to work out a way of actually making some profit out of it.
Yeah.
So, back to what you were saying about it, how it being incredibly socially desirable. Obviously, if the state doesn't get involved, then it has to be worthwhile for businesses to get involved. So how is it useful for them? Because the ARPU is tiny, isn't it, for an African user versus a Western user? But as you say, the scale is huge. I mean, Nigeria alone's got it's got hundreds of millions of people in it, I think.
Yeah.
So then you get into some really interesting business models where your ARPU's tiny, but you find an efficient way of scaling, and you're still making some money, and nothing like the kind of money you make from the biggest country markets in the world, but you're still making some decent money as long as you can scale in an efficient way.
The other. I mean, this is it all ties back to the drivers of the internet and the drivers of this sort of economy, and one of the big complications is the price per gigabit as well, which obviously ties very heavily into ARPU. Now, they need to bring down the price per gigabit to make it more accessible before they can start increasing ARPU. Or not necessarily increasing ARPU, but the number of subscribers they can put on the network. Because I was speaking to someone, and it's ridiculously expensive in South Africa. You're paying like £5 a gigabit. You know, that's almost unthinkable in this market nowadays. I mean, I pay £20 for unlimited. And you know, and I think you're not too dissimilar, are you?
Yeah,
You get unlimited for £20
Yeah.
on O2.
GiftGaff, yeah.
GiftGaff.
But yeah, well, it's funny because
You're not too dissimilar
I'm
on
not too
EE, are
dissimilar.
you?
But the cost per gigabit thing is interesting. There's a guy at the conference I was at who's from Edotco. I think they're quite active in Africa as well, but they're kind of part of Axiata Group out of Malaysia. And he was saying, even in Malaysia, like the cost per gigabit is higher than what they're getting in revenue. So they're selling it at a loss basically, and using voice to subsidise the costs of it for the time being. But I mean, this is obviously the TIP summit, so the whole theme was trying to get network costs down so they can do it more profitably. But yeah, it's massive issues. So.
I genuinely believe in the commoditisation of data and achieving profitability through scale. And I think this is what a lot of the UK telcos are doing very well at the moment, is that they are encouraging more people to use more data, and therefore, you know, they achieve economy of scale through, and that drives a lot of network investment. You know, for instance, tying me into unlimited data, I don't necessarily use 20 gigabits a month, but in my mind, I'm paying £20 for 20 gigabits a month at the very bare minimum. At the moment, because I haven't got internet sorted in my new flat, I'm getting everything through it because I'm hotspotting.
It takes the worry away from about sort of bill shock and all that stuff.
I didn't know you didn't. So every time you're working from home, you're hotspotting.
I'm hotspotting.
How much do you get through then on an average day hotspotting?
I don't know. I mean, last month I had to renew. I got to the throttle limit with about 4 days before my contract renews. So that was 40
pretty
gigabits.
Good though, yeah.
What kind of speed do you get?
I don't check, but enough to go. You know, I don't struggle to work. I don't struggle to work, and I don't struggle to watch TV either. So you only need 5. I mean,
you don't need that much.
Yeah,
this is where everyone
5 or 10. Yeah.
Well, no one really understands how much speed they need.
Yeah.
You actually only need a consistent 5 megabits per second connection to run video. And that's
SD,
you know, that's standard definition. And realistically, do you need anything more than standard definition on your phone? Anyone who downloads a high definition movie for their phone is a mug.
Yeah.
You know, that size screen, HD is completely wasted on it.
Yeah.
Just go.
I mean, your phone is HD resolution though.
Well, what's the point? What's the point in downloading that many megapixels when you've got, pixels when your screen is only that wide?
Is the size of the pixels counts for something though, Pierre?
I mean,
you can have an HD, but are you actually able? Is your eye able to discern the difference?
I agree with between HD and 4K. Don't see the difference, but between SD and HD, there's definitely
fair enough
a difference.
Well, I don't know. I download everything
on a big screen.
Try it out.
I'm not allowed to turn my connectivity on here, so I cannot try it out, can I? That's your rule, not mine.
Otherwise, it starts making farty noises.
I didn't try it out like later today.
But one other thing, by the way, I was thinking back to the Africa one and the business model. So you're talking about there's for some partners there's a revenue sharing thing.
Yeah,
it could be that is ultimately how this gets solved. If the connectivity is basically provided for free, 0 rated, a bit like, you know, I think it was 3 or someone did this thing for certain, or was it Virgin was doing a 0 rating thing. So let's say all the revenue side is a revenue share. So the operators don't actually charge for the connectivity, and then they just got 1% of the revenue from someone using a banking service or something like that. You know, that could be the way to scale it. That could be the way you go from tens of millions of Africans to hundreds of millions.
Yeah,
is by taking out the cost of the connectivity and reverting to a revenue share model. Whether or not that would be enough to drive capital investment and all that sort of thing's another matter.
Yeah,
But
they'd
anyway,
have to
it's
do their
just a
sums,
thought.
wouldn't they?
Hmm?
They'd have to do their
They
sums.
definitely have to do their sums.
Yeah,
to
I mean
get
the
some of
big
those.
the big
Yeah.
problem is there's what do they say? So I wish I could consult the internet at the moment.
It's your antenna. Too many interferences. Sorry.
So MTM have got an acronym which is Chase, and these are they're the 5.
I haven't turned my stuff
No, I'm not
off.
turning mine
No,
off.
it's my. It must
can
be,
look it up for you
It must
if
be
you
the
want.
antennas on my
I can
phone.
use my phone if you want.
Do you want me to look up one of your stories? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's called Chase. So I think I can remember off the top of my head.
Okay, let's see.
But it
I'll
was
test you.
it's coverage, handsets, affordability in terms of price per gigabit. Can't remember what the S is, but E was the development of an ecosystem for Africa as well.
Services?
Services, digital services, yes. So the creation of services in Africa, or for like e-governments,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And those are the 5 areas that are a big stumbling block for addressing the digital divide. So they're the 5 areas, and if it's selling data as a free service, but money is realised elsewhere, maybe.
But as I say, I've got no idea whether
I don't know whether the
they could get
economics
what
of
they
that
need.
would work.
Yeah, I think it would require a very long-termist approach from the operators, and they've got impatient shareholders as well.
Yeah, the operators would have to realise some revenue straight up. Otherwise, there is no incentive for building networks, is there? So there'd have to be some sort of
It'd
subscription
make
model.
for some awkward quarterlies.
Yeah.
We've just blown all this money and we don't
Yeah,
know whether
we've decided to
ever
give
gonna get it
everything away for free. Yeah, I mean, there'd have to be some subscription, but whether
Sound like
that's...
something from Corbyn's
Yeah.
manifesto.
back. Maybe you got us confused with Tanzania. Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to Ian's.
You haven't asked him if he ate any springbok or any other exotic
No, I
animals
didn't.
this time
So you
round.
didn't have one of
I
those.
stuck to steak.
You didn't have one of those. When I went there years ago, you could get a kebab that's got different types of obscure.
No, when I
yeah,
was
yeah,
there,
yeah.
we had this mixed grill thing that was
Yeah.
absolutely enormous. It was only about £6, but you had
Yeah.
every animal under the sun on
Just
plate.
stuff you haven't even heard of.
Yeah.
My expenses report is looking like a bloody mess at the moment.
Was it?
Well, the problem is I got
Good thing I don't
so
sign it
many.
off.
There's like basically no expenditure.
Oh, I
but I've
see.
got attached documents to every single transaction, and they're all for like £1.50.
Yeah,
it's,
yeah,
it's just
Uber
it's
is so cheap.
so long. It's
Uber
really
What a
annoying.
drag. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, am I allowed to ask you now? Or have you got any other stuff that I've forgotten to ask Jamie?
No, you
That-
can ask me. Go
that
ahead.
was a sarcastic,
Go
rhetorical question. Tip in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
The tip doesn't stand for the tip of a joint. What does it stand for?
It stands for Telecom Infra Project.
Okay, and this
Which
was
is-
originally a Facebooky thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it still is.
But it's
I don't know
more
about
of an
that.
ecosystem. Or
I mean,
what?
so I was talking to some people there, and they think Facebook's more involved than ever now.
right?
Because
Well, why wouldn't they be?
because there's been some doubts about it, gaining momentum, and Facebook was pretty much in evidence at the event last week in Amsterdam, and they
Right.
were kind of had somebody almost on every single panel session.
Okay.
And then if you talk to people, they say a lot of the tip projects that are going on. So Telefónica's doing stuff in Peru, for instance. This is sort of on background stuff, but there are people who say Facebook's basically pumping loads of money into
Right.
that at the moment to try and make it work,
Well,
which
they've
sort of
got it.
defeats the object in a way of actually getting low cost stuff out of someone. If a big financial backer is there having to spend heavily on
Well,
making
I mean,
all
it
this
could
stuff
just
run.
it
but-
could be that invest initially and get it
Yeah.
kick-started.
So the idea, for people who don't know what it is, it's basically this scheme to try and get more innovation, I guess, and competition into the telecom equipment market.
Yeah.
Which is something they did something similar with data centers years ago through something called the Open Compute Project.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's had quite a big impact, but it's harder to do in telecom infrastructure because there's more sort of vested interests, there's a lot more royalties at stake,
Yeah.
there's more intellectual property, so it's
And
not
there's
as
more
easy
proprietary stuff.
There's more proprietary stuff,
which
basically.
kind of leads to what I consider to be the big story of that week, because I covered your coverage of it, and
Yeah.
a lot of people read it on Telecoms.com. So why don't you
Yeah,
tell us
so
what that was about?
So one of the things that everybody's been concerned about is the tip runs around and it has members doing trials and messing around with these technologies, but there's not really been that kind of big commitment to somebody doing a commercial rollout. And there's more kind of evidence of that happening this year. So this Telefonica Peru project is actually it's actually commercial. They've got 450,000 people on these OpenRAN networks, which are
Okay.
basically using technologies that allow you to mix and match suppliers a lot more easily than you can at the moment. It's much more
So
software
RAN
based.
is radio access network.
RAN is radio
and
access
we're
network,
talking about the kit that's
yeah,
in
it's like the base stations and all the stuff that goes up at the mobile site. So
Yeah.
that's the costliest bit of the network.
It's supposed to be it's complete disaggregation of hardware and software,
exactly,
isn't it?
yeah.
And commoditizing the
Yeah.
creation of the hardware,
Yeah.
the passive
So the
components.
The
of
hardware
network.
Similar concept
The
to-
hardware is just standardised, like general purpose.
Yeah,
stuff.
similar concept to
Yeah.
the data centers in the
Yeah.
cloud, isn't it? No one
And-
thinks about whether they're on a Dell server or whatever.
Totally. And then
Yeah.
the software that runs over it, in theory, you can run it on any sort of general purpose x86 kind of servers,
Yeah.
and you can. It means you can, and then if you introduce open interfaces with all that, then it means you can do things like. So at the moment, you can't. You've got two big elements of a sort of RAN site, which are the actual radio units themselves, and then all this stuff at the bottom of the tower that kind of processes the signals. It's called baseband.
Yep.
And at the moment, you kind of have to use the same supplier for both because
Right.
of the interface between them is sort of implemented in a kind of proprietary way.
You can't link them together.
No. So
Yeah.
one of the things, it's not TIP. There's another organisation called the ORAN Alliance, but TIP's now kind of quite involved with that, and a lot of the
Right.
TIP companies are sort of using specs that they're developing to allow you to basically, you could, in theory, sort of have, totally different. You'd have like a white box radio developer running, Ericsson software or something. So that in itself allows you to get more competition into the market by doing that. And the big announcement that you're referring to, the kind of one that took everybody aback, was Vodafone getting up on stage and basically saying that they're putting their whole European footprint up for tender. So
Which means like whoever the vendor is right now for their RAN stuff.
Yeah, well,
they've
they've got various vendors in there at the moment. Obviously, the big three.
But they're saying all that business is up for grabs potentially.
All that business is potentially up for grabs.
Right, which is pretty big.
Which is pretty big. So it's like they've been doing, like Telefonica, they've been doing trials. They've been testing new stuff in markets like the UK and
this
Ireland.
is specifically up for grabs for people who can implement some kind of ORAN-y thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. So he got up on stage and very much did the sort of dramatic thing of making it sound like the whole network could become OpenRAN, which seemed, like it was just too good to be true kind of thing from the perspective of OpenRAN players. And then I met him afterwards and said, and he was sort of, it could happen that way. It's not, it's not something we want to rule out, but it's pretty unlikely that that's going to happen. It's much more likely that there's going to be some kind of introduction of OpenRAN technology in some areas.
An
incremental thing. And it's not just about, I mean, he used the TIP Summit to kind of make this announcement, but it's not just about Open RAN technology. So one of the things Vodafone's quite frustrated by is like some of the stuff that's been happening on the 5G standard side, which means you can't do things like, if you introduce a new 5G core network, which is where all your kind of intelligence is, it's like the brain of the network, you have to have sort of new 5G base stations to use with that, and they want to be able to make more use of the 4G kit that they've got out there. And he said there's not been enough support for things like that in the 5G standards process. So the tender they're issuing has got things like that in it. It's not just about using Open RAN technology. It's also about getting more sort of momentum in some of these areas of 5G standardisation that they've not seen as much.
Go on.
I think what's likely to happen is that you'll see, I mean, he said if the Open RAN players kind of play it wisely and, kind of do what they're asked, then there's a good chance they'll come in and take some market share. And I was talking to Gabriel Brown, one of our analysts, and he thinks that if they came away with, you're probably looking at them coming away with something like 5 to 10%, I guess, market share. But that's quite a big introduction of for them to go in and get a kind of
a thin end of the wedge.
Thin end of the wedge, and the thing is, it puts quite a lot of pressure on, which I think is one of the reasons they've done it.
Yeah,
it puts a lot of pressure on Ericsson, Huawei, and Nokia. So he was really, really critical of those companies in a way that service providers aren't often as outspoken
publicly,
as he was.
Yeah.
He basically said it would be an absolute dream if they responded to this and said they were going open themselves and that they were opening up all their interfaces and then we're going to kind of change the way they do things. He said that would be a dream, and he said I'm not very optimistic that's going to happen because they've not given out any signals that they want to do that sort of thing.
And they didn't.
That would destroy their own business models as well, and they're not ready to do that yet.
Yeah,
well, they'd certainly have to adapt them pretty fundamentally.
Yeah. But they've not done enough of the groundwork to adapt their business model.
Well, they feel like they're struggling enough just to make money from doing it the old way.
Yeah, exactly. So they haven't adapted their own business model, so they're not going to disrupt themselves. I think that's a load of bull. Anyway,
what is
this? I think the whole Vodafone situation. I mean, this guy. If you look at who's in charge, telcos are traditionally very risk-averse people. or risk-averse companies.
Yep.
And accountants are traditionally very, very risk-averse professions. And what have you got? And who have you got in charge of Vodafone, one of the largest telcos on the planet? You've got their ex-CFO and accountants. Nick Reed is not someone who takes technology risks.
Are you going to say this to his face on Thursday?
But
I'm not meeting Nick
he has
Reed
been
on
one of the
Thursday.
most.
Jeffries, isn't it? Oh, it's the
I think
UK.
Jeffries is the UK guy. No, I don't think Nick Reed's. But Nick Reed, it's funny that you mentioned Nick Reed. I agree, he's an accountant, they're generally risk averse. But Nick Reed's been one of the most outspoken people in support of getting OpenRAN suppliers in.
Yeah.
So when they did that, this is an announcement a few weeks ago about the trials they're doing, which is parallel wireless, I think, in Ireland, and Mavenir's doing stuff with them in the UK. Nick Reed actually had comments on that saying we need to, they're desperate to get some more diversity into the vendor ecosystem. So Gabriel Brown's take on this is that you look at the market at the moment and it's obviously consolidated over a period of 20 years. You've gone down to three big suppliers, and none of them it's not a sort of ideal situation for any of them. You've got Huawei, which is facing all this sort of pressure from the US. And expanding that footprint is going to be kind of difficult at the moment politically. You've got Nokia, which sort of messed up its 5G product roadmap. And that sort of drives all the pricing power towards Ericsson, which is not a situation that the operators want to be in. So, yeah, they're not going to come along, obviously, and swap out 100% of their network and put in OpenRAN. But in terms of getting like a small percentage share in, I think that's really likely.
And they're forcing a degree of sort of extra competition.
Yeah, I think what he is trying to do is he's putting everything up to tender. He's putting everything up to renegotiation. Yeah. That puts the pressure right back on the incumbents who still own their services, and they're going to have to come back with a more attractive offer. Yeah. Because the last thing you want to do is be locked out of Vodafone's network, which Vodafone is not financially one of the biggest in the world. In terms of creating profits and revenues, but if you look at their physical infrastructure, I think who else compares to Vodafone's physical network? Maybe Orange.
What are you talking about?
In Europe,
internationally.
Internationally, there's. I think it's
200,000 sites. Vodafone
in Europe or globally.
No, internationally. Yeah.
Telefonica's got a bit there, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's only 5 or 6 around the world that can compete with them. You definitely don't want to be locked out to that network.
No. Yeah. And I gather from your reporting that none of the big kit vendors decided to put
this is the thing. It's like, so I was asking how far could this go, and a lot of it is, as Jamie's saying, it depends on how the big kit vendors respond. If they come along and start offering more support for these options in the 5G standard that Vodafone's kind of been frustrated haven't been addressed properly. It shrinks the opportunity potentially for more disruptive players. If they come along and say we're going to be more willing to adopt these specifications that groups like the ORAN Alliance are developing, again it kind of shrinks the opportunity for new players. But they've not been very.
They sort of joined the group. I remember writing it a while back.
They joined the group, but he said it's anybody can join a group and pay a membership fee and get an ID
just to keep an eye on what they're up to.
And they did this. So this wasn't just Vodafone, but TIP itself did this big RFI, which was kind of the trigger for. One of the triggers for Vodafone to decide that it could do a big tender across its European footprint. They just put a request for information out to the market saying, we want commitments to, being able to run your software on x86 servers. We want commitments to OpenRAN specs. And all of the big kit vendors didn't respond. So they had these 7 companies that kind of came back, which are groups like Parallel Wireless and Mavenir. And the one in there that actually was way ahead of all the others in terms of compliance with these requirements is not one of the tiny little sort of startups. It's Samsung, which is obviously not. It's not one of the equipment incumbents in that area.
But they're thinking, why can't we?
They're thinking, why can't we be? Yeah. They've got quite a big presence in certain markets. I think South Korea, obviously, but also they're in with people like Verizon and AT&T in North America. Yeah. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to do something quite disruptive in Europe now.
I think one of the other announcements I think are worth paying attention to from this OpenRAN, and largely it has been glossed over because of the scale of what Vodafone announced, was MTN announced
the 5,000 sites,
an OpenRAN agreement with Parallel Wireless. And I think that is arguably as important or potentially more important, because when you look at OpenRAN, the idea is for low-cost network deployments, and where is low-cost network
back
deployments?
To our previous chat.
It's perhaps more important in Africa than elsewhere. Then if you get a major African telco buying into and adding credibility to OpenRAN, then how many of the other regionalised sort of telcos in these sort of developing markets start to go, well, actually,
it could be a market where they're more willing to roll the dice on that. Well, and then once people like Vodafone have seen that it worked there, they might.
Yeah, and probably in Europe, it's going to where they do get used at first. It's probably going to be in rural or lower income parts of Europe. I mean, one of the challenges they've got is it's very hard to do. This is from Vodafone. Really sophisticated 5G stuff like the kind of massive MIMO. You know, you've got lots of transceivers and receivers, all these like antennas basically crammed into these really high-end boxes, and they're obviously designed for urban environments and provide very high performance specifications. That's an area where it's really hard for OpenRAN to measure up. Where it's much easier for it to do kind of where you need basic connectivity and something you could provide in a village in Africa, let's say, which is, as Jamie's saying, you need that because of the low income.
So we could end up at a time where the big kit vendors become more specialist in the cutting edge stuff. Yeah, and then the basics become increasingly commoditized.
Well,
I'm sure
that's the situation
anyway.
at the moment, but it might, I mean, there's no reason why OpenRAN can't improve and catch up. I mean, Gabriel was saying they're kind of a couple of releases behind in terms of capabilities, but they could get there eventually. So, but at first, certainly, it's going to be markets like Africa and lower income parts of Europe, I think, where it takes off.
I mean, that's where the business case is built for it, isn't it? Because ultimately, if you go back to TIP, what is the commercial objective, and why do Facebook want to get into it? Their big strategy is connecting the next billion. And how do you connect the next billion? Well, you need infrastructure to be cheaper.
And they realised that they needed to get involved.
You open it up again. So so they're spending a lot of money, but it is to connect people to the internet so they can drive service revenue with new users.
And I know some people are really sceptical of it, entirely sceptical of it. Like our friend John Strand, for instance, who phoned me up after the story was written and went, they're complaining about not wanting to take Huawei out of the network because they're saying it's going to be too costly, and they don't want to bear the costs of that equipment swap. And then the next thing they're talking about using OpenRAN, which is a completely untried, untested technology. Right. He just kind of thinks there's a big contradiction there in the sort of messages that are coming out. But
he has a point. Cool. I think we've done nearly now, so I'm not going to get onto your other thing from
leave
Tim.
That,
But yeah, okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot, guys. And thanks a lot for watching. Oh, yeah, don't forget, we get one more chance to listen to our sponsors, so here you go.
Mobile service providers will need a different approach to successfully roll out 5G new radio capabilities. Check out Amdocs Software automated and analytics-driven solutions at amdocs.com/5G-fast to learn more.
Right, now, thank you very much for watching / listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.